He thought it was just another stop, until the wrong mother stepped into the frame. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Maplewood Avenue, painting the quiet suburban street in warm gold, as if nothing in the world could go wrong here, as if nothing ever did. But tension has a way of slipping into even the calmest places, and on that day, it arrived quietly, wrapped in flashing red and blue lights that cut through the stillness like a warning no one fully understood yet. Because at the center of it all stood a boy, no older than 14. His name was Ethan Jackson, his hands slightly raised, his voice steady but uncertain, caught between confusion and the instinct to stay calm, just like he had been taught. "Sir, I didn't do anything," he said, his tone respectful, measured, the kind of voice that hoped reason would be enough. But the officer standing in front of him wasn't listening. Officer Ryan Cole, mid-30s, uniform crisp, jaw tight. The kind of man who believed he could read a situation in seconds and never questioned himself afterward. His hand hovered near his radio as he looked Ethan up and down, not seeing a kid on an errand, not seeing the grocery bag still resting by the curb, but something else entirely, something shaped by assumption rather than fact. "You match a description," Ryan said flatly, his voice carrying just enough authority to draw attention. And attention came quickly, neighbors pausing mid-step, car engines idling, phones quietly lifted. Because people always watch, even when they don't understand what they're seeing, and Ethan could feel it, the weight of eyes, the quiet judgment, the unspoken tension pressing against his chest. But he didn't move, didn't run, didn't argue, because somewhere deep in his mind echoed a voice he trusted more than anything else, his mother's voice, calm, firm, unshaken. "Stay still, Ethan. Stay respectful, even when they're wrong." And so he stood there, breathing slow, trying to hold on to that lesson as the situation tightened around him like an invisible grip. Another officer stepped closer, murmuring something under his breath, a quick glance exchanged, a decision made without discussion. And just like that, the air shifted, not louder, not more chaotic, just heavier, like something unseen had tipped the balance. "Put your hands where I can see them," Ryan repeated, sharper this time, though Ethan's hands hadn't moved, and for a moment, just a moment, everything seemed to pause, the breeze, the distant hum of traffic, even the murmurs of the growing crowd, as if the world itself was holding its breath, because what none of them knew, not the officers, not the onlookers, not even Ethan in that exact second, was that miles away, cutting through traffic with precise urgency, a black SUV moved with purpose. Its driver focused, its destination already set, and inside sat a woman whose presence would change everything. But here, on Maplewood Avenue, that truth hadn't arrived yet. And so the moment stretched, fragile, uncertain, balanced on the edge of something no one could quite name, and Ethan, standing there in the fading light, did the only thing he could. He looked straight ahead and said quietly, almost to himself, "My mom is on her way." The words barely left Ethan's lips before they were swallowed by the tension in the air, as if the street itself refused to carry them any further, and Officer Ryan Cole let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, just enough to signal dismissal. "Yeah, I have heard that one before," he said, his tone flat, uninterested, already moving on from anything the boy might say, because in his mind the situation was already decided, already categorized, already closed. And that was the problem, because certainty without truth is where mistakes begin, and mistakes, when backed by authority, have a way of growing larger than anyone expects. The second officer shifted his weight beside him, arms crossed, scanning the small crowd that had formed along the sidewalks, neighbors who had stepped out onto their porches, drivers who had slowed down just enough to look, a teenager across the street holding up a phone with both hands, recording in silence, not interfering, not speaking, just watching, because sometimes people do not know what to do when something feels wrong but looks official, and Ethan could feel all of it, every stare, every whisper that had not yet been spoken but already existed in the air, pressing against him, tightening his chest. But still he stood still, shoulders squared the best he could, fingers slightly trembling but not dropping, not resisting, holding on to that one instruction that echoed louder now: stay calm, stay respectful, even when they are wrong. and for a brief second his eyes flicked down toward the grocery bag by the curb. The one with the carton of milk and the loaf of bread his mother had asked him to pick up, small, ordinary things that did not belong in a moment like this. And yet here they were, sitting quietly as if they too were waiting for this to make sense. Turn around slowly, Ryan instructed, his voice sharper now, not raised, but edged with impatience. The kind that builds when someone does not get the reaction they expect, and Ethan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not out of defiance, but out of confusion, because nothing about this felt connected to anything he had done, nothing lined up, and that hesitation, small as it was, shifted something in the officer's posture, a subtle tightening, a narrowing of the eyes, as if doubt on Ethan's part was being read as resistance, and the space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. I said turn around, Ryan repeated, slower this time, each word deliberate, and the street grew quieter, the murmurs fading into a low hum as attention locked in, because moments like this have a way of pulling everything toward them, bending focus, bending time. And across the street, an older man took a step forward as if he might say something, then stopped, his voice caught somewhere between concern and hesitation, unsure whether stepping in would help or make things worse, because authority carries weight, even when it is wrong. And Ethan finally turned, careful, controlled, his movements exactly as he had been taught. No sudden gestures, no quick motions, just compliance, because he believed that doing everything right would fix what had gone wrong. But the truth is, sometimes doing everything right is not enough when the problem was never about what you did in the first place. And as he faced away, the flashing lights reflected off the windows of nearby houses, casting brief pulses of red and blue across the quiet neighborhood, like a signal echoing outward, unnoticed by most. But miles away, that same signal had already reached someone who understood exactly what it meant, and inside that moving black SUV, a pair of steady eyes focused ahead, unshaken, calculating distance, calculating time, because every second now mattered in a way no one on Maplewood Avenue could yet understand. The moment Ethan turned, something inside the scene shifted in a way no one could quite explain. Not louder, not more chaotic, but heavier, like the air itself had thickened with expectation, and Officer Ryan Cole stepped closer, close enough now that his shadow stretched over the boy's sneakers, blending into the pavement as if trying to erase the space between authority and assumption. Keep your hands right there, he said, his voice controlled, practiced, the kind of tone that came from repetition, from doing this over and over until it felt routine, until every situation started to look the same, even when it was not. And Ethan nodded slightly, his throat tight, but his voice steady when he spoke. Yes, sir, because that was what he had been taught. Respect first. Always, even when respect was not returned. And across the street the teenager recording adjusted his grip, zooming in just a little, capturing every movement, every word, because something about this felt like it mattered, even if he could not explain why. While the older man who had almost stepped forward earlier now stood frozen, arms at his sides, his expression conflicted, as if he was arguing with himself in silence, whether to speak or stay out of it, because the line between helping and interfering can feel dangerously thin when uniforms are involved. And nearby a woman on her porch whispered to someone beside her, "He is just a kid," her voice soft, almost lost in the hum of the moment, but still carrying enough weight to hang in the air, unanswered, unacknowledged. And Ryan's partner shifted again, glancing briefly at the grocery bag still sitting by the curb, then back at Ethan, a flicker of something uncertain crossing his face before it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by the same guarded neutrality that officers learn to wear like armor, because doubt, when ignored, becomes silence, and silence keeps things moving, keeps questions from forming, keeps everything simple. And simple is easier than right. "Where are you coming from?" Ryan asked, not aggressively, but not gently either, just a question delivered like it already had an answer attached to it. And Ethan swallowed before replying. "The store, sir, just down the block," his words careful, measured, each one placed like he was stepping across something fragile, hoping it would not break beneath him. And for a second Ryan said nothing, his eyes scanning Ethan again, as if searching for something that would confirm what he already believed, something that would justify the tension that had built around them. But nothing obvious appeared, No sudden movement. No raised voice. No sign of anything beyond a teenager trying to understand why his ordinary afternoon had turned into this. And yet the absence of evidence did not dissolve the moment. It only made it stretch. Longer, thinner, more uncomfortable, like a silence that refused to resolve. And then the radio on Ryan's shoulder crackled softly. A burst of static followed by a voice too distant to fully make out, but enough to remind everyone there that this was not just a moment on a quiet street. It was part of something larger, a system, a chain of decisions, a network of voices that could reinforce or redirect what was happening. And Ryan reached up, pressing the button briefly, his response short, controlled. But whatever he heard back did not visibly change his posture, did not shift the direction of the situation. And so the moment continued forward, unchanged, unresolved, while miles away the black SUV moved with steady precision, turning onto Maplewood Avenue with a quiet confidence that did not match the chaos it was approaching, its engine low, almost unnoticed beneath the distant hum of conversation. And inside, Ava Jackson's eyes lifted slightly as the flashing lights came into view ahead, reflecting faintly across the windshield, her expression unreadable, not rushed, not panicked, but focused in a way that suggested she already understood what waited at the end of this street. Because some people do not need to see a situation unfold to know exactly what it is. They recognize it the moment it begins. And back on the pavement, Ethan stood exactly where he had been told, unmoving, his voice quieter now as he repeated, almost like a reminder to himself, "My mom is on her way." And this time, for just a fraction of a second, something in the officer's expression flickered, not recognition, not yet, but the smallest crack in certainty, the kind that appears right before everything starts to change. The flicker in Officer Ryan Cole's expression vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced again by that same controlled certainty, the kind that does not leave room for second thoughts. And he exhaled slowly, shifting his stance as if resetting the moment back into something familiar, something manageable. "Stay right there," he said. Even though Ethan had not moved an inch, his hand still raised, his posture exactly as instructed, because sometimes authority repeats itself not to guide but to reinforce, to remind everyone watching who holds control, and the crowd felt it. That subtle tightening of the scene, the invisible line being drawn, on one side the uniform, on the other a boy who had done nothing more than follow instructions, and still the balance did not feel even. Across the street the teenager recording lowered his phone for a second, glancing at the older man beside him as if asking silently, should someone say something? Should someone step in? But the man only shook his head slightly, not in agreement, but in uncertainty. Because moments like this do not come with clear instructions for bystanders, only the heavy awareness that whatever happens next will matter more than anyone is prepared for, and Ethan felt it too. That shift, that growing weight pressing down on his chest, but he did not let it show, not fully. His breathing remained steady, his voice quiet when he spoke again. "Sir, you can check the bag. It is just groceries." And his words were simple, logical, an attempt to bring the moment back to something real, something provable. But Ryan did not look at the bag. Not yet, his focus still locked on Ethan, as if the answer had to come from him, as if the situation was something to be solved through presence rather than evidence. And for a brief second the second officer glanced down again at the bag, hesitation flickering across his face, a question forming but never spoken, because silence is easier than disagreement, especially in uniform. And the radio crackled once more, sharper this time, the voice on the other end clearer, calling out updates from somewhere else, somewhere unrelated. But the sound cut through the moment like a reminder that the world outside this street was still moving, still functioning. Even as time here seemed to stretch thinner and thinner, and Ryan reached up again, pressing the button, his response clipped, professional, but when he released it, his gaze returned to Ethan with the same fixed intensity, as if nothing outside this moment could change what he had already decided. And then, faint at first, almost lost beneath the quiet hum of voices and distant engines, a new sound entered the scene, low, steady, approaching with purpose, not hurried, not aggressive, just precise, the kind of sound that does not demand attention but earns it. And a few heads in the crowd turned slightly, eyes narrowing toward the far end of the street where a black SUV rolled into view. Its movement smooth, deliberate, its presence somehow different from the passing cars that had slowed earlier, as if it carried a weight that had not yet been revealed, and Ethan heard it too, just barely, his eyes shifting for the first time since he had turned around, not enough to break posture, just enough to register that something was changing, something was arriving, and Ryan noticed the shift, his gaze flicking briefly past Ethan toward the approaching vehicle, a small glance, nothing more, but in that glance lived a moment of distraction. A crack in the rhythm he had maintained since the stop began, and the SUV continued forward, slowing as it neared the scene, its dark windows reflecting the flashing lights in distorted streaks of red and blue, like two worlds colliding in silence, and the crowd instinctively parted just enough to give it space, not out of instruction, but out of something unspoken, something sensed rather than understood, because sometimes people feel the shift before they see it, and as the vehicle came to a stop along the curb, the engine idling quietly, the street fell into a deeper kind of silence, not empty, but expectant, the kind that settles right before a truth steps into the light, and Ethan's voice, softer now but steadier than ever, broke through that silence one more time. "That is her," he said, not loudly, not urgently, just with a certainty that did not need volume, and for the first time since the moment began. Officer Ryan Cole did not respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the closed door of the SUV, waiting, without realizing that whatever came next was no longer under his control. For a moment, nothing happened, and that nothing stretched longer than it should have, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough for the crowd to lean forward without realizing it, long enough for Officer Ryan Cole to regain just a fraction of his earlier confidence, his shoulders tightening again as if to reclaim control of a situation that suddenly felt uncertain. But then the driver's side door opened with a quiet, deliberate motion, no sudden movement, no rush, just a controlled exit that carried a weight far beyond the sound it made. And the woman who stepped out did not look around immediately, did not react to the flashing lights or the crowd or the tension that had built around her arrival. She simply stood there for a second, taking in the space in front of her with a calm that did not match the scene, her posture straight, her presence composed in a way that did not need explanation. And when she finally began to walk forward, each step was measured, steady, unhurried, as if she already knew exactly where she was going and why. And the subtle shift it caused was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Conversations softened, phones steadied, even the air itself seemed to settle into something more focused, more precise, because presence like that does not ask for attention. It commands it without effort, and Ethan saw her first not as a symbol, not as a solution, but simply as his mother, his shoulders easing just slightly, the tension in his fingers loosening though his hands remained raised exactly where they had been, because he understood that nothing was over yet, not until she spoke, not until the moment changed completely, and Ryan watched her approach. With a different kind of focus now, his earlier certainty replaced by something more cautious, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to place her, to understand her role in this situation, because something about her did not fit the pattern he expected, not the way she carried herself, not the way she moved, not even the way the crowd seemed to react to her without knowing why. And when she stopped a few feet away, she did not raise her voice, did not rush her words, she simply looked from Ethan to the officers, her gaze steady, direct, not confrontational but not yielding either. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, carrying just enough authority to cut through the silence without needing volume. "Officer, what is the reason for this stop?" And it was not a question asked in confusion. It was a question asked with precision, as if every word had been chosen carefully, as if the answer mattered in a way that had not yet been revealed. And Ryan straightened slightly, instinctively adjusting his stance. "Ma'am, your son matches a description," he replied, his tone still controlled but no longer dismissive, no longer casual, because something in the balance had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. And she nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging the statement without accepting it, her eyes moving briefly toward the grocery bag by the curb before returning to him. "A description of what?" she asked, and again, her voice did not rise, did not push, but it carried weight, the kind that forces a response whether someone is ready or not. And for the first time, Ryan hesitated, just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough to change the rhythm of the moment, enough to break the pattern he had been following since the beginning, and behind him, his partner shifted again, glancing between them, sensing the change even if he could not fully explain it, while the crowd remained silent now, completely still, as if everyone understood that whatever happened next would define everything that came before it. And Ethan, standing there in the middle of it all, felt something he had not felt since the moment began. Not relief, not yet, but certainty. The quiet understanding that the moment was no longer one-sided, that the balance had begun to tilt, and as the woman's gaze remained locked on the officer in front of her, steady and unwavering, the question still hanging in the air, unanswered, it became clear to everyone watching that this was no longer just a stop on a quiet street. This was something else entirely, something that had just begun to reveal its true shape. The hesitation lingered just long enough to be noticed, not by everyone, but by the ones paying close attention, and in moments like this, it is always the smallest pauses that carry the loudest meaning. Because certainty does not hesitate, certainty answers immediately, but doubt, even the smallest trace of it, slows everything down, and Officer Ryan Cole felt that shift whether he acknowledged it or not, his posture still firm, his voice still controlled, but something beneath it had changed, something less visible, less confident. "We received a call about a possible theft," he said finally, choosing his words carefully now, as if precision mattered more than it had a few minutes ago, and the woman in front of him listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady, not challenging, not aggressive, but focused in a way that made every word land heavier than intended. "From where?" she asked, and again it was not confrontation, it was clarity, the kind that forces details into the open, and Ryan shifted slightly, glancing toward his partner for just a second before responding. "A store down the block," he said, nodding in the general direction Ethan had already mentioned, and she followed that gesture briefly, her gaze moving toward the grocery bag still resting untouched near the curb, then back to him, connecting the pieces without needing to say it out loud. And for a moment, no one spoke, because sometimes the truth begins to surface not through words, but through what no longer makes sense, and the silence that followed was different from before, not tense, but revealing, like a light slowly exposing something that had been overlooked, and behind Ryan, his partner cleared his throat quietly, shifting his weight again, the uncertainty that had flickered earlier now more visible, harder to ignore, while the crowd remained completely still, every phone held steady, every eye fixed on the exchange, because what had started as a routine moment no longer felt routine at all, and Ethan stood there between them, his hands still raised, but his shoulders no longer as tight, his breathing more even now, not because the situation was over, but because something had changed, something had begun to balance. And then the woman took one small step forward, not closing the distance entirely, just enough to make her presence undeniable, her voice still calm when she spoke again. "Did you find anything on him?" And the question landed differently this time, sharper in its simplicity, harder to avoid, and Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, just enough to show that the answer was not what he wanted it to be. "No, ma'am," he admitted, the words quieter now, not weak, but no longer reinforced by certainty. And for the first time since the moment began, the structure of the situation shifted visibly, because an unanswered assumption can hold weight, but a confirmed absence begins to break it apart, piece by piece, and she nodded once, acknowledging the answer without reacting to it, as if she had expected it all along, and then, without raising her voice, without changing her tone, she said something that seemed simple on the surface, but carried something deeper beneath it, something that did not belong to this street alone. "Then why is he still standing like that?" And the question hung in the air, heavier than any command, because it did not just address the moment, it exposed it, and Ryan did not answer immediately, not because he could not, but because the answer no longer felt as clear as it had before, and that was the difference. That was the shift no one could ignore anymore. And somewhere in the distance, another radio signal echoed faintly through the quiet neighborhood. But this time, no one paid attention to it, because everything that mattered was happening right here, in this silence, in this question, in the realization slowly settling over the scene that what had begun as control was now being examined, and once control is questioned, it never feels the same again. For a long second, the question did not just hang in the air, it settled into it, pressing down on everything and everyone, because it was no longer about what had happened, it was about what could not be justified anymore. And Officer Ryan Cole felt that shift fully now, not as a fleeting doubt, but as something heavier, something harder to push aside, his eyes briefly moving from the woman to Ethan and then back again, as if searching for a way to restore the structure that had already begun to unravel. And yet no words came immediately, because the situation had crossed an invisible line, the kind that once crossed cannot be stepped back from without consequence. And behind him, his partner finally spoke, his voice quieter, more cautious than before. "Ryan." Just that, a single word, but it carried enough weight to break the rhythm they had held since the beginning, because now it was no longer just one perspective. Now it was shared awareness, and shared awareness changes everything. And Ryan inhaled slowly, his shoulders rising just slightly before settling again, his voice returning, but not the same as before, not as certain, not as sharp. "He is being detained for questioning," he said, the phrasing more formal now, more careful, as if structure alone could restore control. But the woman did not react to the wording, did not challenge it directly. Instead, she let the silence sit for a fraction longer, just enough for everyone listening to feel the gap between the words and the reality in front of them. And then she spoke again, her tone unchanged, steady, measured. "Then you should also know who you are detaining." And that was the moment the balance shifted completely, not loudly, not suddenly, but undeniably. Because those words did not belong to uncertainty, they belonged to knowledge. And Ryan's gaze sharpened slightly, not in aggression, but in focus, as if he had just realized that he had been missing a piece of the situation all along. And the crowd felt it too. That subtle turn, the quiet understanding that something larger was about to be revealed. Phones steadied even more, breaths held just a little longer. Because moments like this do not come often. But when they do, everyone senses it, even if they cannot explain why. And the woman reached calmly into the inside of her jacket. Not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. Every movement controlled, every second intentional. And for a brief instant Ryan's posture tightened, instinct taking over. But he did not interrupt, did not speak, because something in her composure told him that this was not escalation. This was clarification, and she withdrew a small, dark case, holding it at her side for just a moment before opening it, with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have been in the silence that surrounded them. And when she raised it, she did not extend it forward immediately. She simply held it where it could be seen, her voice calm as she spoke. "Commander Ava Jackson, United States Army." And the words did not echo, they did not need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to, and the effect was immediate, not chaotic, not dramatic, but absolute. Because recognition does not create noise, it creates stillness. And Ryan's expression changed in a way he could not fully control, not fear, not shock, but realization, the kind that comes all at once, connecting everything that had not made sense before, her composure, her questions, her presence. And behind him, his partner straightened instinctively, his earlier uncertainty replaced by something clearer, something more defined. While the crowd remained completely silent now, the kind of silence that feels different, heavier, because it carries understanding. And Ethan, still standing where he had been told, felt that shift in a way no one else could, not as tension, but as release beginning to form, because the moment was no longer pressing down on him. It was turning outward, redirecting itself toward the truth that had just stepped into view. And Ava did not raise her voice, did not move closer. She simply held Ryan's gaze, steady, unwavering, and said one final sentence that did not need emphasis to carry its weight. "Now I will ask you again, officer, what is the reason for this stop?" And this time, there was no space left for assumption, no room for uncertainty, only the reality of the moment, standing clear for everyone to see. The silence that followed her words was not empty. It was charged, filled with the kind of awareness that changes how people stand, how they breathe, how they think. And Officer Ryan Cole felt it settle over him like a weight he could not ignore, his posture still upright, but no longer rigid with certainty, his eyes fixed on the identification in her hand, reading it once, then again, as if repetition might somehow change what it said. But it did not, and that was the problem, because reality, once revealed, does not adjust itself to comfort. It demands adjustment from those who failed to see it. And Ryan lowered his hand slowly from his radio. The movement subtle but significant, a signal that the moment had shifted beyond his control, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different, not weaker, but measured in a way it had not been before. "Ma'am," he began, the word coming out more formal now, more careful. "We were responding to a call, a report of suspicious activity." And even as he said it, the explanation felt thinner than it had minutes ago, because context had changed, perspective had changed, and what once sounded reasonable now sounded incomplete, and Ava Jackson did not interrupt, did not challenge the statement immediately. She simply listened, her gaze steady, her expression unchanged, allowing the words to exist exactly as they were, and that was what made them unravel. Because sometimes the most powerful response is not opposition, it is clarity, and Ryan seemed to realize that as he continued, adding details that sounded more like justification than explanation. "The description was vague, but your son matched enough for us to make contact." And the moment the words left his mouth, the gap between what was said and what was true became impossible to ignore, even to him. And behind him, his partner shifted again, this time not out of uncertainty, but recognition, his eyes briefly dropping toward the ground before lifting again, as if acknowledging something silently, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood, and the crowd remained still, completely silent now, because the story unfolding in front of them no longer needed interpretation. It was revealing itself, piece by piece, and Ethan, still standing where he had been placed, felt the shift in a way that was almost physical, like pressure slowly releasing, like a weight lifting inch by inch. Though he did not move yet, did not lower his hands, because he understood that the moment was not finished, not until it was made right. And Ava took a small breath, not a sigh, not frustration, just a measured pause before she spoke again, her voice calm, but carrying something deeper now, something that reached beyond this street, beyond this moment. "Suspicious of what?" she asked, and the question landed with precision, cutting through the explanation without raising her tone, and Ryan did not answer immediately. Not because he could not, but because the answer no longer fit as easily as it once had, and that hesitation, that visible pause, was enough for the truth to settle into the space between them, enough for everyone watching to understand what had not been said, and Ava did not press further, did not escalate. She simply turned her gaze briefly toward Ethan, her expression softening for just a fraction of a second, not breaking composure, but acknowledging him, grounding him, reminding him without words that he was no longer alone in this moment. And then she looked back at Ryan, her voice steady as she spoke once more. "You have confirmed there is no evidence, no stolen property, no cause beyond assumption." And she did not phrase it as a question, because it was no longer one. It was a statement, a reflection of everything that had already been said, and Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes shifting for a moment before returning to her, because there was nothing left to contradict, nothing left to defend without stepping further into something he could not justify. And the realization settled over him fully now, not sudden, not dramatic, but complete, and the street, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now held something different, something clearer, the unmistakable presence of truth taking its place where assumption had once stood. And in that moment, without a raised voice, without a single aggressive move, the entire situation had turned, not through force, but through clarity, through composure, through the simple, undeniable weight of being seen for what it truly was. The truth did not arrive with noise, it did not demand attention, it simply settled into place, undeniable and complete. And for the first time since the moment began, Officer Ryan Cole let the silence stay without trying to control it, his shoulders lowering just slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to hold on to except what is real. And he nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging not just her words, but everything that had led to them. "You are right," he said, The admission quiet but clear, and the weight of it moved through the space like a shift in gravity, because accountability, when it finally appears, changes the air around it, and behind him, his partner stepped forward slightly, his voice calm, almost careful. "You can lower your hands, son." And this time, no one questioned it, no one repeated it, because it did not need to be reinforced. It was simply correct, and Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but out of habit, making sure the moment had truly changed, and then slowly, carefully, he lowered his hands, the tension in his shoulders releasing as his arms fell to his sides, a small movement that carried more meaning than anything that had happened before it. And Ava watched him for just a moment, her expression softening again, not losing composure, but allowing something human to exist within it, something that reminded him he was safe now. And then her attention returned to Ryan, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity, the kind that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. And Ryan met her gaze, no longer defensive, no longer certain, just present, aware of what had unfolded, aware of what it meant. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because everything that needed to be understood had already been revealed, and the crowd, still gathered around the edges of the street, remained silent. But it was a different kind of silence now, not uncertain, not tense, but reflective, as if everyone there was processing the same realization at the same time, that moments like this do not begin with noise. They begin with assumptions, and assumptions, when left unchecked, can turn ordinary situations into something they were never meant to be. And Ava finally spoke, her voice steady, measured, carrying that same calm authority that had shifted everything from the moment she arrived. "What matters now is what happens next," she said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a statement, a direction, something that pointed forward instead of backward. And Ryan nodded again, understanding exactly what she meant without needing further explanation, because the moment was no longer about control, it was about responsibility. And as he reached for his radio, his movements careful, deliberate, the same street that had felt heavy with tension only minutes ago now felt different, lighter, not because nothing had happened, but because something had been corrected. And Ethan bent slightly to pick up the grocery bag from the curb, the simple act grounding the moment back into something ordinary, something real. And as he stood beside his mother, the flashing lights still reflected faintly across the windows, but they no longer dominated the scene, they were just part of it. And as Ava turned to walk back toward the SUV, Ethan at her side, the crowd slowly began to move again, conversations returning in low voices, phones lowering, the moment dissolving back into the rhythm of the neighborhood. But something lingered, something that would not fade as quickly, because everyone who had stood there, who had watched in silence, would carry the same understanding with them. That day, that moment, that shift, and somewhere behind them, as the sound of the engine started quietly once more, the truth remained, steady and unshaken, not spoken loudly, but clear enough to be remembered. He wore a badge to hold power, but she carried the truth to define it.